Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about 2024's most overrated IDP Dynasty assets.
Hike!
When you play in Dynasty, you have to be able to balance overvaluing recency bias, breakout potential, and just sheer popularity for players. So we're going to be talking about some players. Joe and I both, we're going to be sharing two each. And some guys we just feel are overrated based on the value that people view them as. So, Joe, who do you got as your first one?
Yeah, first player I'm going to go with is going to be defensive end Will Anderson, who we were looking at some defensive dynasty rankings with our friends over at the IDP show and saw that they rank him as the defensive end one, despite in our IDP Fantrax league, he finished as the defensive end 17. He played 14 games. He had 27 solo tackles, 10 assisted tackles, 11 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and a fumble recovery, which, he's had, really good seasons. He's had 18 total sacks in his first 2 years, which is pretty impressive. But some of these guys, to have him number one, ahead of a Micah Parsons, who's, had a double-digit sacks since he's entered the league. Guy like Aiden Hutchinson, who I like a lot, was having a great season before he got hurt. Nick Bosa, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett. I get that Anderson's younger player at 23 years old. He still has a lot of potential on other things ahead of him. Just think it's kind of crazy to have him as the number one guy ahead of some more proven players that still do have some potential. As even a guy like Micah Parsons is 24. He's still on the younger side and has a decent amount of potentials. And another thing with Will Anderson is he's had 2 years and he hasn't yet been able to put a full season together. He's missed a couple of games, this year with an ankle injury. So nothing crazy, but he's gotten nicked up and missed a couple of games, in each of his first 2 seasons. And then as far as like his outlook for the future, I think obviously bringing in Danielle Hunter's helped a lot. He's only going to be potentially around for 1 more year. Does he come back in 2026, or who else do the Texans bring in to kind of be the running mate going forward after that?
Of all people, I am shocked in you that you were pounding the table for Micah Parsons. I'm surprised you're not even talking about Micah Parsons. He'd be your one to be the most overrated because you've always said the guy's overrated.
Yeah, I did. And I know for this episode, I did consider it, but then I had, looked at his stats and the fact that he has had the double-digit sacks, and even his tackle numbers has been pretty good. And he missed some games this year, and his stats were pretty much even on par from years that he played 17 full games. So I just didn't feel like I could pick him, and think Will Anderson's a much better choice based on, where the dynasty rankings are and how he really finished the season.
Well, I'm a big believer in Will Anderson.
Yeah, and it's not to say that I don't like Will Anderson. I just think it's, kind of crazy entering his 3rd year here to have him as the DN1.
Yeah, it's a little steep, and I think that's where, when people are thinking about their rankings, you'll find that a lot of them heavily weight the age because he's so young and he's been productive. So
yeah,
I think that's partially why. I think that's honestly some of the reason, not to get on a tangent here, I think that's one of the reasons why we like contract leagues and incorporating a salary cap, because it's like, yeah, you could have them, but then you're going to, choose to re-sign them later on. That's a completely different game than I can keep Will Anderson for the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's very true.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So my first player I'm going to be talking about is the most overrated IDP Dynasty asset. It's going to be, I'm a little surprised I'm even saying this. I thought, again, another guy you'd be saying, but it's going to be defensive end Kayvon Thibodeaux. He was defensive end 53 in our league, Joe. The IDP show ranks him at a modest 21. So from their standpoint, our friends over there at the IDP show, they're not all that impressed with him either. But he's still got a big name. Obviously coming out in the 2022 draft with Aiden Hutchinson, I believe. He was making a lot of waves, but he's now played in 3 seasons. And what does he really have to show for entering into his 4th season now we just really haven't seen that huge potential. This past season, he had 14 solo tackles, 14 assisted, 5.5 sacks, a forced fumble, 23 hurries, and 17 quarterback hits in 12 games. Look at his sack totals, 4, 11.5, and then dropped down to 5.5 this year. He's never had more than 29 hurries. I thought that Brian Burns was going to help him, but I almost wonder if Brian Burns was more of a beneficiary than Kayvon Thibodeaux was. So I just think at the end of the day, I like them actually better than Aiden Hutchinson, but I've been proven wrong up to this point. And so I don't know. I don't really know. He's had a couple of defensive coordinators, if I'm not mistaken. I just I don't know what's going to happen for his future. So to me, he's been a big disappointment. I think he's really just a name.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, I mean, I've always believed this guy's been overhyped since his rookie season. I've always thought he's, kind of been a bust candidate. Didn't really truly believe in him just because I didn't believe he had the work ethic that it would take to be a premier like edge rusher and put up big numbers. And you just see it. He's very sack dependent, doesn't really get you tackles and help you out in the run game. And he just he shows up against weak opponents and then will disappear whenever there's a competitive offensive line. And guys like Aiden Hutchinson and Max Crosby's with high motors, high work ethic are just going to always be better.
More likely to have a higher tackle floor too.
Yeah, definitely.
So Joe, who's your second overrated player for Dynasty IDP?
Yeah, I'm going to go with linebacker Jack Campbell. Finished as a linebacker 24 in our league, and the IDP shows got him ranked as the LB4. And, yeah. And that's ahead of guy. They got Nakobe Dean at LB5, rookie at LB6, Ernest Jones at LB7. So it's interesting how they have their linebacker rankings in general. But I just think it's, kind of crazy to have him that high, especially because he's not really truly fully he's one of the starting linebackers, but like Alex Anzalone, I know we like a lot. We've talked about him. He missed 6 games. I think Campbell, for his stats this year, was a beneficiary of that. But we're not expecting Anzalone to go anywhere. So he's got to contend with him for playing time. And then also, they do like to mix in Malcolm Rodriguez, who another guy, he got hurt. He was out for the rest of the season, but I'm sure they'll have him back at some point next year as well. But Jack Campbell, so how he did finish the season, he had 69 solo tackles, 62 assisted tackles, 1.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery as well, which I understand, Jack Campbell's got a lot of potential. He's a younger player. I was excited about him. Honestly, thought he'd be having a more impactful NFL career. I just don't think we've seen enough performance out of him yet to have him ranked as the LB4.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I wonder if the reason why he's ranked so high is because he's a former first-round pick. My reason for saying that is you haven't really seen a lot of off-ball linebackers getting first-round treatment. I feel like it's been quite some time since that happened. I feel like maybe a lot of teams have got burned. There's a guy I'm thinking of. I can't even think of his name. Who was the old Raiders linebacker from Alabama? You know what I'm talking about? I'm pulling trivia on you right now. Rolando McClain or something like that?
I think that sounds right.
I don't think that's right. It's something.
Well, I mean, that was a name. I mean, I don't know if
it was. Exactly. Oh, maybe it was. But I'm just saying. I feel like we have. I mean, Roquan Smith obviously was great, but there haven't been a lot of off-ball linebackers. I feel like drafted in the first round. So I'm wondering if that's a little bit of the buzz there.
Yeah, it could be, and I think that's also why there was so much hype around Jack Campbell and some of his excitement was just because he was taken in, first round pick, and dynasty leagues especially put a lot of value in the draft capital of players, expect big things out of them. But I just think we've all been kind of surprised that they haven't necessarily just given him that, LB1 role on that team, and really Alex Anzalone is the one that kind of makes that defense go.
So my other player I'm going to be talking about here, who I believe is overrated as an IDP Dynasty asset. This one might be a little bit controversial, Joe. It's going to be linebacker Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers. The IDP show, our friends over there rank him as LB2. Although in our, longest yard, fantasy football league that we call, he's linebacker 13. So he didn't really do all that well. So I did a little researching on the guy. If you look at this past season, 76 solo tackles, 55 assisted tackles, 1 sack, 4 forced fumbles, and 2 interceptions. Had an interception for a touchdown as well. I don't know if you would find this interesting or not, but Fred Warner in his 7-year career has never been a top 10 linebacker in his career. I think it's one of those things that people think of Fred Warner as this all-pro, and he is a very good linebacker, but he's a good NFL linebacker. He's great at coverage. He's great at a bunch of different things, but he's not a tackle getter. He's not going to give you a ton of tackles, which is what you're looking for at the linebacker position. I understand that he dealt with that fractured bone in his ankle since week 4. So he was going to be in for a career year. He was going off like a rocket at the beginning of the year. And then I think that injury just kind of slowed him down. But I think it's one of those things. I think the reason why they probably have him higher is because linebackers are just so unpredictable. I was just looking as I was doing research over the past 5-6 years. It's a graveyard of of not necessarily old in age, but linebackers as far as years past that were top 10 linebackers. They're just no more. They're gone. They're not in the league.
Yeah.
So Warner is a guy who's been in there, and he's been there for 7 years, and he's probably going to be playing for another year or 2 years after that. So that in and of itself, for him to be this relevant for so long is very impressive. But I could give you a list of names. If you look back over the past, 7 years that I was looking at, it's like, man, that guy's not here. That guy's not here. They just fell off a cliff.
Yeah, it really is crazy. Just, thinking about different linebackers that were elite, and then all of a sudden, and now an afterthought. Even just as recently as like a Devin White, it's crazy just how his career has kind of finished up here, as nobody seems to really want him after like being an elite linebacker for a long time with the Tampa Bay Bucks defense. So linebacker position definitely is an interesting one. But yeah, it is interesting with Fred Warner. I think I get caught up in that hype too, just because you just watch him and he makes a lot of plays for the 49ers, and he is a highly rated NFL linebacker. But I do think as far as like tackles go, when Dre Greenlaw's healthy, he's the tackle machine on that defense.
Just to prove my point, as you go through the graveyard here, you mentioned Devin White, right? He's nowhere to be found. Rashaan Evans was a top 10 linebacker a few years back. He had basically a one and done year, and then he really wasn't anything else, right? Devondre Campbell, he's kind of went by the wayside. Shaquille Leonard, right? He's no longer relevant anymore. Blake Martinez, not relevant anymore. Jalen Smith, when he was in the Cowboys. Joe Schobert, Deion Jones. These are all linebackers that at one point were top 10, performed top 10 in a year. Corey Littleton, I remember him. It's like you talk about these players, it's like, oh, I remember these guys. It's not that far long ago. It's like, yeah, it really wasn't. And these guys just all of a sudden fall off the cliff. You've got guys like Roquan Smith. You've got guys even like Foye, honestly, it's been very impressive for a guy who was a late round pick. But Roquan, Fred Warner, these guys, they've lasted the time. So I could see why from that standpoint he's bankable. But I just find it interesting for him to be linebacker too, and he's never been I think the best he's done is linebacker 11 on a year, at least in our leagues. Hard for me to be able to say he's a linebacker too. Just, there's just not a lot of longevity in the position.
Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy. And then you see a guy like Bobby Wagner who's out there still doing it for the Commanders right now.
Yeah. There are some players that can do it. And when you have one of those, it's very valuable. But see, that's the difference, because you've got guys like Wagner and Roquan who are actually performing at a high level and are the top, top 5 linebacker, top 3 linebacker. You're not getting that with Warner, though.
Yeah. No, a good point. I didn't, I would have thought, just because, like you said, the name value and just knowing he's a very good, highly rated NFL linebacker, that he would have at least been in the top 10 at some point.
Honestly, in my IDP career, which we've now been doing IDP, really involved heavily into it probably for the past, 5 years, I think we've been involved, which is hard to believe. It's been so long. But looking back, honestly, and people will probably think I'm nuts by this, I think linebacker is probably the scariest position of them all. Corner is kind of a weird one as it is. But linebackers, man, it's just like one day they're great, the next day they're trash. I don't know. It's just like hard to really put a lot of investment and stock in them when everybody and their brother are like linebacker. Everybody was a linebacker. I'm like, I don't know. It's dangerous in those streets.
Yeah, and then especially when you got guys that'll just come out of the woodwork too and be fantasy relevant for you that you can kind of just plug in there. So definitely you and I both have learned throughout our process that it's a mistake to give these linebackers long-term contract or anything, and just don't I've learned to put less stock in the linebacker position and kind of just stay fluid in there and don't give anyone too lengthy of a contract.
Unless they're a proven commodity, like
Right.
a Roquan, like a Bobby Wagner, then I'm willing to say, okay, he's worth the money. But other than that, no way.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Levante David worked out for me, so.
That's true. So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few players that Joe and I feel are the most overrated IDP Dynasty assets. I'm sure if you agree or disagree, you're welcome to provide your opinion on all the places where we have our episodes. Let us know what you think. If you disagree, if you agree, we always like to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.